This is Dr. Jason Remenick, CEO and founder of Thalamus, and you're listening to Thalamus Grand Rounds, the premier podcast built by Graduate Medical Education for Graduate Medical Education. Whether a program coordinator, program director, GME administrator, DIO, or applicant, join me and my guests as we discuss hot topics in innovation in the residency and fellowship recruitment process. Hi, everyone. We have a great podcast today. My guest and I will be discussing how program coordinators and administrators can manage the expectations of their colleagues, faculty, and applicants during recruitment season and all that entails. And I'm joined today by an excellent guest, Starla Pathak, who has nearly 3 decades of experience in GME. For 10 years, she has served as the manager of educational programs in the Department of Orthopedics at Tufts Medical Center, where she oversees both the orthopedic residency and hand fellowship programs. Starla, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to join you.
Yeah, it's great to have you as well. We always like to start by just starting with, can you tell us a little bit about your background in GME and how you got to where you are today?
I sort of fell into GME many years ago when I first started, before there were even coordinator organizations and a real set role for a coordinator. I had actually been temping in the Department of OBGYN, and the person who was the coordinator was retiring. And so they said, we think you can do this. And they just said, here, this is your new job. And it grew from there. And when I took over that position, the person who had retired had never used a computer, had only used rice paper. And so literally it was learning on the fly and building all of the systems and creating systems one step at a time, with not a lot of help or mentoring. It was just, one foot in front of the other. And from there, I was in OBGYN for 16 and a half years and oversaw for a while before the program went to a different hospital, the Reproductive Endocrine Fellowship, the Maternal Fetal Medicine Fellowship, as well as the Orthopedic or the OBGYN residency. And then I decided that I wanted to take a break and see what else was out besides GME, while still having my toes in it a little bit. And I managed a urogynecology practice in Cambridge and ran the urogynecology fellowship before I got talked into coming back to orthopedics. And here I am, 10 years here now.
Amazing. Quite the journey through GME. We seem to have the conversation a lot that a lot of program coordinators and admins kind of fell into it or accidentally wound up in it and expected to be there temporarily, and then decades later, here we are. And so it's just it's amazing to hear these stories and how much influence the coordinators and administrators have over GME and can be so influential to programs. And certainly it leads really well into what we're going to discuss today, which is the idea of managing the expectations of faculty, applicants, and others during recruitment season. And so really to get us started, what proactive steps can a coordinator take to prepare their program for interview season?
I think it's really simple. I think that you create lists. If you're involved with reviewing applications, you do the review. If you are involved in actually selecting applicants for interviews, you do that based on what criteria your program director and or chairman or both have set up, and you move forward. In my case, in orthopedics now, we have a review committee with our faculty. So I do the first review of the applications, and then I divide up those that are not filtered out for one reason or another, and divide them amongst the committee. And then they have this year actually had about 3.5 weeks to review their applications. And we're doing them fairly holistically. To be quite honest, we have never done it any other way. And we have had fantastic matches. We had a fantastic match last year. And I think part of it is due to the commitment of our faculty, absolutely above anything else, as well as the commitment of our residents and the work they put into, whether it's doing meet and greets or whether it is all in on interview day. Every one of them are there. And I think that's part of the secret, is that it's just as everyone having buy-in and doing your prep work and making lists.
Yeah, how are there ways to help getting faculty to buy into the programs for programs that maybe don't have as much faculty support, or what in your experience have you used to sort of get faculty to buy into recruitment overall?
It's interesting because here we aren't just based here at the medical center. We have faculty at 2 other affiliates, and one is at one of the largest orthopedic hospitals in the country. And we don't have trouble really getting buy-in because they know it's to their benefit that if they are involved in the process, they're going to have input into having a great, intern class. And that in turn turns into great, second year, third year, fourth year, and chief residents. And I think in our case, it comes from the chairman, and he really expects the affiliated faculty to participate in the process because they are such an important part of our program. And I think for anyone that has problems getting their faculty to buy in, that they have a conversation with their chairman and or their program director, or in my case, it's both, and see what they can do to help with the process. It could be a conversation chairman to chairman or program director to chairman, but they don't have trouble giving up 1 or 2 days during the entire year to participate in interviewing activities. They look forward to it. And I think that's the secret, is it comes from the chairman on down. And the expectation that my faculty here at the medical center is that they will all be here to participate, and they're all in. So I have 17 faculty that will be participating in the interview day, and we'll be interviewing 45 candidates on each of the 2 days that we interview. For any physician, I think, whether it is a surgeon or a non-surgeon, getting them to give up clinic time or OR time or time in the lab is difficult. But I think above all else, it shows the commitment that the faculty have to the program and to the residents by participating.
No, that's incredible. And so I love the idea, and just having been in GME recruitment myself now for almost close to it, coming up on a decade, I've found that the programs that we work with on our end and the ones that are most successful have the collective buy-in of the program coordinators and administrators, the program director, and in many cases the chair. And that alignment and that understanding and those framing of expectations are what really results in an effective recruitment, because you have the faculty buy-in. And coming from the applicant's perspective, I think it results in a much more united front. And to me, that is a big benefit to programs in their recruitment as well. So no, that's really interesting. What How do you manage expectations for your applicants coming into interview with you?
Boy, that's a tricky one, especially the last 2 years as we've gone virtual. Last year, I think it wasn't only managing our faculty's expectations, it was helping the medical students with what their expectations were going to be. And because I also am involved in the medical school elective clerkships, I meet with every group of students and we talk about the process. And I think that has been something that has been important to me just in terms of growth, but also it really provides something to the medical students that many don't get at their own institutions from their home programs, either their medical school or from their home programs, that for whatever reason it might be, I have students that still call me, you know, after they've long finished their rotations and said, this is a situation I have, how do I handle it? Or I'm getting pushback from my home program about, you know, only having 3 letters versus 4 letters, or, you know, the types of programs I should be interviewing at. And these are the things that I meet with the students about during their rotation and just talk to them about the process and managing their expectations. And especially last year when we went all virtual and we were all sort of grasping onto anything because none of us knew what to expect. You know, I just almost dumbed it down and said that this year has not been perfect in any way, stretch, you know, shape or form. And that at this point, we shouldn't expect perfection from our interviews. There are so many different platforms. There's so many different ways that programs are managing this process. And we are all learning on the fly. And that as a student, you're going to have to manage your expectation and not expect perfection from the program coordinator or the program, because they're learning on the fly as well. And I think honestly that if we are upfront and show some sympathy and empathy to the students on what they're embarking on, I think that goes a long way. And I don't think it takes a whole lot of time out of our day. And it also gives the students a really good impression about your program. I think that, you know, we are also on the forefront of our program and we're often on the front line. And I think that, you know, we don't know what's going to happen this year or next year. And we all need to just take it one step at a time and reassure the students that it will be okay. Unfortunately, last year there were a number of students that didn't match, and I don't know how we solve that. I think that, you know, there are many ideas on the table in all specialties about how to avoid or reduce some of the situations that happened, you know, when the match came out with so many people not matching.
Yeah, I think they're really strong points overall. I think the idea of the coordinator sort of being the advocate to the applicants, I think is a really strong point. I think applicants are going through a lot in the challenges of getting through this process, particularly in orthopedic surgery, which is obviously a very competitive specialty. And to try to apply into ortho and then not match, of course, is certainly quite devastating. And I think there are a number of challenges around just the application and recruitment process in general, especially with everything going virtual last year, which led to a lot of anxiety as to how to who ends up where, what is this going to do to the process? And then certainly this is now our second virtual recruitment season. What does that mean? What does that mean there and going forward? And so, yeah, I really love the idea, sort of as you put out there, of getting out in front of it and communicating clearly to the applicants, to help set their expectations, because I think depending on where they've come from in medical school or otherwise, they don't always get that coaching too. And I think the more programs such as yours can recognize that sooner and be advocates for the applicants, like that only helps recruitment and the entire process in general, and really provides another benefit from the program to the applicants, even if they don't match at your program. At least they know what they're doing.
And I think that's very true. And I think that if a candidate, regardless of what specialty they're in, feels that they have some connection with the coordinator or the education manager, I think that it does go a long way. And I think that we have a very special role. And I think that sometimes not enough of us use that opportunity to advise these students and to help them. And I think, and I've said this to a number of people, I really think that medical schools do a disservice to their students by not provide them with more of guidance on the very basics of this process. And I don't know if it's because a lot of the docs who are involved at the school have not been through the process recently, but I think that we're in a very special position to help guide these young people. And yes, they're adults and we should have expectations on that. But I think that, you know, we also need to remember that they've spent basically their entire lives in school on some level or not. And it's very nerve-wracking for them to think that they might not match into something they've dreamed about their entire lives. And I think we can provide that opportunity for them.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite important, and it's this idea of managing expectations again. It's the expectation of what programs should expect coming from applicants that are applying to their program. And I think, yeah, it's very important to recognize the stakes on both sides of what this entire process is. And so no, that's really interesting. Have you noticed any difference in the managing of these expectations over your career as a coordinator? Obviously the last 2 years for sure, but have things changed?
It's definitely changed. It has, I mean, now I'm going to age myself and I'm not that old, but you know, when I first started, there were no work hours. So our residents in OBGYN were working 120, 130 hours a week. The recruitment process was in paper. I was in OBGYN amongst the group that we were the first ones to beta test IRIS. And, you know, and this is long before it was a web-based program.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we would have to have our little CD and we would have to upload the software, and it has changed. I think it's changed for the better. But I also think that when you had to hand type an application, you might have been a bit more, you paid more attention to the detail and made sure that, you know, you weren't sending out an application that had spelling errors or grammatical errors. And I think sometimes in the electronic age that sometimes I don't think they spend enough time proofreading their applications and understanding that that's the first thing we get to see about them and that it matters. And so I definitely think there has been a shift, obviously for the better, but it's definitely been a shift since I started way back when.
It's always really interesting to look back on the history of this process and how things used to be and how they are now. I think there's a lot of criticism overall, just given some of the challenges that exist, but some things I agree are much improved even from when I applied as an applicant 10 years ago at this point. And so it's important, again, about expectations is right. It's how much effort are you putting into your application. I think there's definitely a subset of candidates who over edit their application as well. And I think it's
absolutely
about finding that balance too. And so, yeah, I think as an applicant, knowing that you're going through this process, it's important that your application, be as complete as can be, well read. We were talking recently on another podcast that we've done on holistic review and how all the elements of the application blend into that. And I'm excited to hear your program was implementing holistic review before people were talking about holistic review, because I think it's important. And that also sets expectations for applicants and faculty, and that you're using the entirety of the application. And I think for candidates, it's easier for them to understand. And when we have a lot of medical students who come to us and go, well, how do I approach my application? And my advice always is, well, you're writing to people who practice the specialty that you want to go into every single day. They're also incredibly busy. So you want to give them the highlights in a well-written, well-organized way without being too overly wordy. Certainly, I've worked with a number of orthopedic surgeons in the OR, and I think it's the same sort of practice there also. And so it again just comes back to this topic of expectations. And obviously you're dealing a lot with orthopedic surgery now and the hand fellowship. What are the differences in the multiple specialties you've worked in? Was it different preparing? Obviously, we're not talking about necessarily the same points in time, but was it different preparing OBGYN faculty or urogynecology fellowship faculty for interview season?
I will say, for me, I've been lucky in that when I was in OB, I had very strong chairmen who really believed in the process and believed that one of the ways that we continue our trajectory and to keep improving is to have our faculty involved. And so, like my situation now in orthopedics, at the time I was in OBGYN, I was fortunate to have several chairmen that had the same philosophy. And so it's been different for me in that respect. The specialties are different in that I sort of was in, OBGYN when it was predominantly men, through the transition where it was, half and half, and now predominantly women. I think that we deal with, the same issues that, is finding a balance of time and how do we structure our interview days so that we are not taking up someone's entire day. And I think over the course of, 28 or 30 years, I've been able to come up with something that works for us in terms of how we schedule. And I mean, you and I have talked before, when I called you and said, all right, are we going to be able to do this? Because we're interviewing 45 people on a day. And I could just see the expression on your face, like you are mad. But look, we do 2 interview days. We do 45 on each day. And we start at 7:30 and we're done interviewing by 1. It goes to, I've got 17 faculty interviewing, and they're not doing chimpy 12-minute interviews. They're doing 20, 25-minute interviews with 3 faculty. And they're spending time with my residents or with the hand fellows when we're interviewing. So when we were preparing as a specialty, the guidance that we sort of took to heart was try and make the interview experience as close to your in-person experience as you can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did. I mean, literally, we mimicked exactly what we do on our in-person day, but we did it virtually, and it worked. It worked. It might not work for some, for another program. For us, it wasn't important to have them here, from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon and go to grand rounds and go. They can do that anywhere. Let them meet our faculty. Let them meet the people who are going to be teaching them. And that's our strength. My residents are my strength as well. So between the two, that's what we focus on and we highlight.
It's very important, and I think for all programs to recognize that they have to do what works for them, because every program and every institution has a different culture and or a different mission.
Absolutely.
And the better they can define it for the candidates, the better they're able to identify where they want to train. And it's called a match for many reasons, but it's also finding the right program for the right applicant and vice versa. And yeah, certainly with the switch to virtual, a lot has changed. I think the programs that have taken a very deliberate approach to building their in-person day in a virtual space have succeeded in their recruitment and transitioned over easier to the virtual space. I very much remember that conversation with 45 interviews. It's a lot of interviews. There are some other programs we know now that are doing close to the same amount of interviews, and that is a number that works for a number of orthopedic surgery programs because of OR duties and managing the ORs and managing patients. And some are interviewing in the evening. We've seen programs interview in the early morning and really on Saturdays and Sundays. And it's interesting to watch the diversity of the programs, but that also gives you a flavor of that program also. And I agree. I think the important thing in whether it's in person or virtual is you want to meet the people you're working with, because that's going to give you the biggest idea of the culture. Hospitals are hospitals. They all have call rooms. They all have operating rooms. They're mostly interchangeable, give or take. But you're going to the program, and it's important to know what the culture of the program is, what the emotion of the program is, how the program defines itself and otherwise, and similarly for the applicants. So, it seems like things on the whole it was a successful transition. How have you dealt with either your applicants or your faculty in terms of stresses or frustrations when things haven't gone to plan? And that doesn't just have to be in the virtual season. It could have been anything prior as well, or just general lessons that exist.
One of the things that I become more aware of, and again, this is a lesson I've learned over time, especially for us in the Northeast, whether it's the weather, whether it is, I don't know what it is, but in this time frame, mid-November to the end of January, early February, when the residents and faculty may be getting to the hospital when it's dark, they're not going home until it's dark. They're not seeing daylight. So I really look for and watch for some seasonal affect. If there's, if I'm noticing a little cabin fever going on, I really try to tune in both to the faculty and to the residents or fellows and just check in with them individually, collectively, just to make sure that there's not something that we can do for them. Because when you, and you know this, when you're coming into the hospital at 5 or 5:15 in the morning and you're not leaving until it's 6 or 7 at night and it's pitch black out and you don't see the light of day, it can affect your overall well-being. And I really try to tune into that. And I would encourage others to do the same. You'll notice slight subtleties and things that you might not normally see. And I just check in with them. I
Yeah.
just make sure that, you know, that I would say for me, that's the one thing, especially as we now with the time change, I tend to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's an important point, and it has implications for the virtual world also. And if you're in that OR setting and you're coming into the hospital when it's dark, and then you're interviewing applicants on Zoom, like it's all not necessarily how we were built to be as humans. Like we were supposed to see the sun. We have our circadian rhythm that's based off of the sun in many ways too,
Right.
and it certainly affects us. And then you not only throw in the dark, but you throw in the northeast winter, and it definitely can affect anyone and everyone. And so I think that's very important. And you know, it's also important for, I think, the applicants to see also, because they're going to be training in different environments. And for the people that want to be in the Northeast, like this is part of training in the Northeast as well. And
Right.
having trained both in the Northeast up in Rochester, New York for medical school, I had sort of that winter versus sort of the where residency in California. Like, yep, after the clocks change, it gets dark in California too, and it gets cold. But I used to joke with my colleagues in California who were like, "Oh, it's coming in, it's dark in the morning, and it's dark when I leave at night." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you're not going uphill in snow both ways." And so, like that creates another barrier. So,
And it does. And I've got, you know, several residents in my program now that are from the South that have never experienced a New England weather, you know, winter. So, you know, just keeping an eye on, letting them know that if there's something they need, that, you know, it's not a problem to just come to my office, call me, text me, you know, just don't not reach out. That's all I tell them. It's better to reach out than to not just sit in your apartment or, you know, be alone. And, you know, that's the one thing, you know, I think transitions, I think we all experience it in different ways, and how we deal with residents or faculty that might be struggling on, whether it's with personal issues or, you know, they're not hitting the mark on a rotation or whatever. I think for a coordinator, it's important to be available and non-judgmental. And I think I've always tried to make it something where my door is open, what's said in my office stays in my office, with the understanding that if there's something I feel that needs to be bumped up, I will bump it up to the appropriate, whether it's the chair, the program director, whatever. But they need a safe space. And especially if they're dealing with a clinical issue or a surgical issue, I have absolutely no outcome, or I don't have any influence on the outcome of what their training is going to be. So this is a safe space for them to just come talk if they need to.
mm-hmm.
I think the girls, young ladies, are more apt to do that. But I've had, you know, some of the guys that have just hit a roadblock for something, and I've sort of helped them walk through whatever, you know, it was that they might have been struggling with. And it's not perfect and it might not be the perfect solution, but we're in a very special place where we don't have any influence on the outcome of their training in terms of the clinical or the surgical aspect, but we do on the interpersonal side. And I think it's important.
No, I agree. I'd often go to our residency office and just, crack some jokes with the program coordinator that was my coordinator, and we're still very close to this day. We were talking the other night just to kind of check in and see how things were going with each other. And so I think it's really important. And this idea of a check-in overall, be it through the stress and frustration of interview season, through winter and the time change, or really any of the piece of training and or recruitment is also incredibly important, because it does help assist in managing expectations of these other situations as well. And I think that's where the coordinator and the administrator are such vital, critical components of the program, because you're the one who's seeing this with your trainees and your faculty day in and day out. And the programs that do it well and have a coordinator who can kind of get the program through this, it's not necessarily in your job description, but I'd say it's probably one of your most critical elements of your job as well. And the one that those in your program are going to remember throughout their careers and professions and such as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so sort of building on that now, do you ever find that faculty or applicants have a divergence of expectations on how recruitment will go? And so is there any times where someone is very, very reasonable in their expectations, or entirely unreasonable? And so just trying to look at just sort of the tail ends of the bell curve, when things go really well or are really far off from where expectations should be. Do you have any examples of those, or how that affects a recruitment day?
I think I try to manage the expectations before we even get to the interview day. I'm communicating personally with the applicants and, basically outlining how the day will go, or, prior to, the virtual piece, and prior actually before our program using Thalamus, like I tend to maybe overmanage things, maybe. And so I didn't rely on whether it was the ERIS software or whatever. Like, I had my system of how I scheduled people. And I think what has become somewhat of a norm for medical students to swap interview spots or days with each other without notifying or going through the program coordinator or the manager of the program. And they just decide that one wants to interview on one day, the other one has decided they want to interview on the other day, and they do the swap. And I've had students not understand why I wouldn't honor that swap, because in most cases, I probably had a wait list for that day. And I really, truly feel, and I, would get down in the gravel with them and explain, if you're the candidate at the top of the wait list and you really wanted to be on that day, if you have two candidates switching, you're circumventing the process. And I managed the process. And, I would put it out there amongst the candidates, and I would make it very clear in our invitation to interview that there's no individual swapping. If you need to swap an interview day, you need to go through me, and you need to, respect the process. And I think in the long term, it they respected it because I was upfront with them and I just didn't kneel to them and say, you know, you can walk all over me. And ultimately they, you know, 9 times out of 10, they probably got the switch, but they needed to respect the process.
Yeah.
And, you know, with the electronic piece and they can, you know, swap days and, you know, or put themselves on a wait list. That's great. And one of the things I'll say that I have loved is that, you know, I have an ordered wait list. So if somebody's on a wait list for a day, I know the person who was at the top is going to go into the day first. I don't have to worry about it going, someone getting into a day because their last name started with A. And I think that's the piece. But again, it's managing your expectations from the time you send out your, you know, invitations to interview through the entire process. And I think honesty is the best policy. And if you are straightforward with them, I think, you know, they may not be entirely happy, but they'll respect your approach and the way that you know, move forward.
In a similar sense, designing some of the features for Thalamus, we've often been asked, well, why isn't there a feature where just 2 candidates can trade without getting the program involved? And we've pushed hard back against that because the program is managing the day and we can swap, we can do that, that exists, but it has to go through the program. And we are very focused on staying that way because we don't want it to be that applicants sign up for a day that they're not really coming and then try and use that as leverage to broker a trade into a day that they may want to come. And to us, it leads to some potential gamesmanship in the system. And yeah, we have a wait list. We allow programs to run the ordered wait list as you mentioned, and we think that's fair as well. And now you're of course getting into not only process but components of equity and inclusivity, and that's becoming very important as well. And so, yeah, I think it's always important to remember this is a process. There's a lot of things happening with students signing up for various dates, interviewing at many different programs. And yeah, at some point, the program decides how many people they want to interview. They may be running a wait list as well. And you know, there's a lot that can be discussed in terms of that, in terms of how many students should you invite, how many interviews should students go on. And I think a lot of this is trying to be figured out at the national level. Certainly with orthopedic surgery having the universal offer interview date and the or the universal interview offer date. I forget which way the acronym goes, but it's and now
a
moratorium this year, right? And so that this is new compared to last year, and it's a new part of the process.
I think one of the things that the specialty has done is to recognize that there needs to be more involvement from the program director and program leadership, APDs, to help guide these students so that they are not, you know, accepting more interviews than what they're really going to need to do. There is no need for an applicant to accept 40 interviews. There just isn't. So, you know, I had a talk with my chair and I said, you need to meet with them. During the moratorium, you need to just meet with them for 15 or 20 minutes and talk about their list, what the expectations are, and for some, do they really need to interview at, you know, 20 or 30 programs? The answer is no. And it's impressing upon them at that point before they start accepting interviews.
Yeah,
that they won't even attend.
Right. It's very important. And as you know, we've done a lot of research on our end, and we published a paper in anesthesia. We're now working one on primary care, and it's looking at over interviewing. And we can say almost without question that there is over interviewing by both programs and applicants across the board. And
Yep.
that's of course a newer trend over the last 5 years or so. But it's something that's certainly happening. And last year was the first year of the universal release for ortho. This year they've added in the moratorium of not being able to schedule until 48 hours after. And I think the reason for it is great, right? Like, it's trying to get students to go to the interviews that they really want to attend, so they're not over interviewing. And similarly, then that serves as a signal for the programs of for the students that do come to the interview. And I think as long as there's a commitment on both sides to make the process better, like, to me, that's really inspiring, because I think there's a lot of people who want to see change on both sides. And I think this is at least a step in that direction, and getting feedback from the applicants into what they want.
We need to come together. And I think the specialty has taken the first step to have the universal offer day and to have the moratorium, so that we can meet with the students and give them a realistic outlook on what they should be doing in terms of the number of interviews.
Yeah, and I think it's again just a really important piece. It's about managing expectations. It's the students are submitting more applications than ever before. The programs are having to review many of them, and as we've said already, each program is very different. Different levels of faculty buy-in, different numbers of applications, different geographies, different practice environments, etc. And needing to do a universal offer, of course, puts a time limit on certain things. And for some programs that works, and for others, it seems like they're inundated with more applications. And so it's about managing those expectations too. And I think really, and then managing expectations with the internet and spreadsheets and forums and Twitter and things flying around. And I think at the end of the day, it's important to recognize that I think there are some really well-intentioned and caring and empathetic people on both the program side and the applicant side. And we work with both, and we consistently try to remind each side that at the end of the day, this is a process. It's run through the internet. Interviews are run through the internet right now as well, but on both sides there are people. And I think that's really important to remember. And I think, again, it brings us back to setting expectations. And so, this has been a great discussion today. And one question we always love to wrap up with is, have you picked up a new hobby through the pandemic? Something new that you've been excited to work on or otherwise? And what is that thing?
I learned how to bake artesian bread by one of our French neighbors, who they haven't been able to go home to France since before the lockdown. They've got young kids who we sort of have adopted, and I've got 3 golden retrievers, so I know when they're coming by my house on their way to school, because the dogs go crazy. But the wife went to pastry school in France, and so she's taken me under her tutelage, and so I'm learning to make artesian bread, and she's going to teach me how to make French croissant. And so that's probably been my COVID activity.
That's awesome. That's very serious bread. My wife is French Canadian, and she keeps telling me that we need to go to France when the pandemic ends, because I need to try all the pastries and baked goods. And so I'm very much looking forward to that. So
we had to temper the bread, because we could eat bread every day. And he's like, oh, you just wrap it up and then you slice it and put it in the toaster, and you can have it for breakfast, and then you can have it for dinner when you have. I'm like, that's an awful lot of bread. And I was making a lot of bread, and thankfully I'm back in the office, so I'm not making quite as much.
Well, that's good. So you've been tempering your bread expectations, and pun intended, as a way to
Yes.
wrapping all of this up. And yeah, no, Starla, thank you so much for a really insightful conversation about managing expectations of your faculty, of your applicants during the recruitment season and beyond, across multiple specialties, across in-person and virtual, and really how to navigate any challenges that come up even as our processes evolve. And so I think it's really insightful to both applicants, coordinators, and program directors, faculty, and anyone else listening to this, just ways we can continue to improve and manage these processes. And it starts with expectations. So thank you again for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun. And it's a great conversation. And I hope that, we learn best from each other. Honestly,
For sure.
we learn best from each other.
No, absolutely. So thank you so much, and have a great evening.